Welcome. How extraordinary it is to participate in the Global Day of Jewish Learning. What an idea to be able to learn Torah, to study together with hundreds of communities around the world, thousands of people around the world. And this evening, what we're going to look at is a little material from the 13 Petalled Rose by Rabbi Steinsaltz. And we're going to focus on the last part of chapter 7, which is the human image. I want to say at the outset that the human image as a chapter is the last chapter that I would recommend somebody to start with. I say that because it was, for me, the most difficult of the chapters. I know that there are differences of opinion as to where you should start in this book, The 13 Petalled Rose. Rabbi Steinsaltz, I understand, suggests that you begin at the beginning. But I, at least this one time, disagree with the rabbi. I think that chapter 1 is one of the toughest chapters. It's a long chapter. It has a lot of technical terms, and it would discourage the new student from jumping into this book. Nonetheless, I found that with all of the difficulty in chapter 1 and chapter 2, and with some of what I consider to be the easier chapters, the human image for me personally was, at least originally, the most difficult chapter in the book. And I'm going to point out why as we go along, but I want to direct us just for the moment to the last paragraph of the chapter. Because it's the last paragraph of this chapter that has a connection to the theme of this year's Global Day of Jewish Learning. So the rabbi writes, in Jewish thought, the concept of beauty is linked to the central sphere of Tiferet, which in itself is actually an expression of several basic elements of existence, each of them manifesting the same fundamental quality in different ways, such as truth, Torah, beauty, compassion. The common denominator may be seen as harmony. So let's just stop there for a moment. We discussed this before, but I want to reiterate that the notion of these 10 sefirot is obviously something that Rabbi Steinsaltz is hitting the reader of this book over the head with. Meaning to say, the rabbi just doesn't mention the 10 sefirot, or doesn't even just mention it in one chapter, but repeats over and over again. Almost every chapter in the book discusses the 10 sefirot. Chapter 2 and 3 of the 13 Petalled Rose goes into detail about each of the 10 sefirot. The chapter that was added in the new edition of the 13 Petalled Rose is another discourse on an understanding of the 10 sefirot. So let's just stop for a moment and pull back and talk about the 10 sefirot as a general concept, let's say. Rabbi Steinsaltz points out earlier in the book that the creation of the universe was not creating something out of nothing. That creating something out of nothing happened in the step before that, according to our sages. In other words, when we try with our imaginations, with our minds, to imagine what nothing is, what was it when there was nothing? It isn't that there was empty space, because empty space, after all, is something. Even if it's empty with space. There's a thing there. It's emptiness, but nonetheless, it's something because it's the something of emptiness. How is it possible for me or for any of us to imagine nothing in that step before, where it wasn't just empty space, it was absolute nothing? What is? Can the human mind even conceive of absolutely before nothing? Because, as the sages put it, as Rabbi Steinsaltz describes earlier in the book, first God created nothing. That was the first thing that was created. Nothing. Before there was that nothing, there was ultra nothing. It was so much nothing that we can't even talk about. But so God created nothing,
And then the vehicle that God used, say the sages, to create within this nothing are the 10 Sefirot. The 10 Sefirot are the vehicles through which God is creating the world. The mixture of the combination of the contracting of any permutation, any of the permutations possible among these 10 Sefirot. That's what existence is about. We need, say the sages, to understand what these 10 Sefirot mean, what they are. Why? Not just because it's interesting and because we say God created the world with these 10 Sefirot, but rather interesting to each of us because we ourselves are made up of the 10 Sefirot. So that's a little bit of a clue into it, in that the human body, and remember the chapter that we're looking at is called the human image. The human body is considered to be a microcosm of the whole, the microcosm of everything. So when it says in the Gemara that when you save one life, you save the whole world, you can see this on an ethical level, of course. Save one life, you save the whole world, because it's a whole person, it's a person's life. Who knows how many children and grandchildren will come from it. One person can create a whole world. But in the more esoteric view, that we look at ourselves as though, again, we are a microcosm of the whole. That if we understand the 10 Sefirot and how they relate to each other, we will understand our own existence in a more complete way. And if we understand how the Sefirot work in the world, if we are able to witness the functioning of the 10 Sefirot, once again, we'll have a clearer sense of what's going on in the world. So, focusing on one of the Sefirot tonight, the Sefirah of Tiferet. Tiferet, if you look at the chart of the 10 Sefirot, occupies an interesting position in the chart. Not only is it the middle in terms of top and bottom of the chart of the 10 Sefirot, but it's the middle in terms of the right and the left. So Tiferet is the center. Another clue to the understanding of Tiferet is that we say that Chesed is Abraham, Gevurah is Isaac, and Tiferet is Jacob. So an insight into what this Tiferet is going to mean has some connection to Jacob, to Israel. That we as Israel, we have to become masters of these 10 Sefirot. We have to be able to understand them, be able to see them, to recognize them. I was trained as a librarian, and I often joke that there are two kinds of librarians. There's the librarian who likes the library to look nice and neat all day long. Even at the end of the day, everything is nice and neat. Nobody has touched a single book, but everything is nice and neat. Then there's a librarian who, at the end of the day, sees that the library is a mess. There are books all over the place, on desks in different areas. That librarian is delighted because the books are being used. Two different kind of personality traits. There are some of us who are more expansive. There's some of us who are more to ourselves, more contracting. Rabbi Steinsaltz says that nobody is any one sphere, but that the differences between us are the differences in the proportion and the usage of those 10 sefirot. So the person who wants those books to all be neat and nice and don't make any changes, it's a different personality type than the type that's welcoming and saying and come in and come in. So Tiferet as the central sphere is the sphere of a number of, let's say, words that the rabbi uses. You don't have this in front of you, but I want to read off to you a bunch of different ways in which Rabbi Steinsaltz has defined Tiferet in different places, not just in the 13 Petalled Rose. We're going to continue doing this in kind of a scattered way, but I'm convinced that I'll be able to pull it together before we conclude. Number one, Tiferet is a combination of harmony, truth, and compassion. Harmony, truth, and compassion. So one of the things that Rabbi Steinsaltz warns us about in the second chapter of the 13 Petalled Rose about the Sefirot is not to think you can define any of them easily. You can't define any of them in one word. You can't say that Tiferet means beauty, or it means harmony, or various aspects of it will come together, and in your mind you'll get a sense of it. But harmony, truth, and compassion have some kind of common thread. Harmony, truth, and compassion. The rabbi says Tiferet is harmony and compassion as well as beauty, being a synthesis or a balancing of the higher powers of attraction and repulsion. So again, Tiferet is the central sphera, so it's preoccupied with balance, with some kind of a balance between top and bottom, balance between right and left. As a parent and as a grandparent, I know that the game of parenting is the game of chesed and gevura. How much should you say yes, and how much should you say no? The parent who is always saying yes is making a terrible mistake. The parent who is always saying no is making an equally terrible mistake. It's the parent who knows how to combine the two, and to combine the two at the right time. Sometimes we need to say no. Sometimes it's terrible to say no. It's never any, we never have any preconceived notion of when we have to balance it all. It's as though, and the rabbi says, as though you're sitting in a control room. And what I often picture it as the postman in the post office but our control room. This situation calls for a little bit of chesed. No, I think this situation calls for a little bit of gevura. No, I think this situation calls for a little bit of compassion. Now, what's the difference between compassion, which is Tiferet, and chesed? It's one of the things that these who wrote beg to ask. What is the difference between the two? Why is it called Tiferet? Is it called compassion? Why is it? What does that mean? What's a few more? It happens to be Tuesday today, which is perfect for this discussion because the rabbi says Tuesday is a manifestation of the sphere of Tiferet, beauty or harmony, and it's considered a day given to success and good fortune. Each of the 7 days relate to each of the lower 7 of the 10 sefirot. So the Tiferet is considered to be Tuesday. But a more important one for our discussion. The rabbi writes elsewhere, in Jewish thought, the concept of, well, this is the last paragraph of the chapter, concept of beauty is linked to the central sphere of Tiferet. So the theme of the Golden Jewish learning this year is beauty and ugliness, and what does that all mean? So the rabbi is giving us a little bit of a hint here by saying that beauty is linked to the central sphere of Tiferet, which is in itself actually an expression of several basic elements of existence, each of them manifesting the same fundamental quality in different ways. So again, here are Torah, beauty, and compassion. In what way are Torah, beauty, and compassion the same fundamental quality? What is the essence of Torah, or of beauty, or of compassion, which makes the three of them, and the other one, of course, and truth? Truth, Torah, beauty, and compassion, the rabbi is suggesting, all have the same fundamental quality. What is that fundamental quality? The rabbi goes on and says the common denominator may be seen as harmony. And since this apprehension of harmony is so many-sided and variegated, it cannot be reduced to only one aesthetic meaning. In other words, harmony, you can't define harmony. It depends on what the elements are that you're bringing together to make harmonious. In one situation, X, Y, and Z in a certain proportion will be harmony. In another situation, you have to have a different proportion in order to make it harmonious. Sometimes a radical response to something is not radical, it's reasonable. Right? Sometimes it seems like it's radical, but based on the situation, that radical response is the reasonable response for whatever that situation is. The rabbi goes on to say, even in the Hebrew language, there's a constant interchange and substitution between the concepts of good and beautiful. The good being called beautiful and the beautiful good. Because both are grasped as a harmony between things. So once again, the rabbi is focusing on this term harmony, and I want to point out that there's a passage in the 13th Petalled Rose in the chapter called Mitzvot. One sentence that I think added to this will make some sense. The rabbi says that the system of mitzvot constitutes the design for a coherent harmony. So the system of the mitzvot are trying to produce a harmony. The system of the mitzvot constitutes the design for a coherent harmony. Its separate components being like the instruments of an orchestra. How so? The rabbi says, so vast is the harmony to be created by this orchestra that it includes the whole world and promises the perfecting of the world. Seeing the mitzvot in this light, one may understand on the one hand the need for so great a number of details, and on the other hand the denial of any exclusive emphasis on one detail or aspect of life. There was a project at Columbia University many years ago called the Yiddish Atlas Project. And the Yiddish Atlas Project was an attempt to do two things. One, it was to put on a map how the different pronunciations of Yiddish, how they move. So some of us say kugel and some of us say kigel, and so forth. And where do those kinds of changes appear? So the scholars at Columbia University were trying to plot this on a map as an atlas. The second part of it was, the reason I think of it is a town like Moscow would be very small on the Jewish map, whereas a town like Yaroslav would be a gigantic town on the Jewish map. Now, you may not have ever heard of Yaroslav, but it happens that in Yaroslav there was something for a long time called the Council of the Four Lands, where great rabbis from all over would come to Yaroslav, to the Council of the Four Lands, and would learn and would teach and would decide questions that had no precedent, and it was an important gathering. Most of us never heard of the town, but in terms of Jewish history, it's huge on the map. And then there are other towns which might be huge on a general secular map, but not very important. It has to do with proportion. I think about a soup also. You have a soup, and then one tiny little spice can change the whole soup. So when we're talking about harmony, and we're talking about proportion, every situation is different. Every single situation is different. We talked about this so many times, but I think it's so important that our tradition of Judaism is not a cookbook where you can look it up and find the answer and do it. We just don't, there's too many possibilities. You can possibly anticipate
every single possibility in human existence and write it down in a book. But rather, we learn and we learn and we learn and we learn and we learn, and then at a certain point we have to put our books down and go outside and deal with the world, and we don't have the books with us, and we can't ask, and we have to figure out what is the harmony of, what do I have to add to this situation to make it a situation of Torah, to make it a situation of truth, to make it a situation of harmony. What do I add? Is this a moment for chesed, to be open, or is this a moment for strictness? Is this a moment for, when, let's say you're running a business. Sometimes you say, well, we need to do more research. We need to get more data. Sometimes you get the data and you think, even though it says this, my intuition tells me something else. Well, there are some times when you have to go by the data. sometimes when you have to know, you have to go by your intuition, despite what the data might say. Yet each of us, at every moment in our existence, every moment, the fate of the universe is ours. Are we going to make, what's the next thing that we're going to do that's going to change the universe? Remember that the Rabbi Steinsaltz describes in chapter 1 that there are two kinds of angels in the world. There are the angels that God creates to run the world. But then there are the angels that each of us creates every moment, every thought, every gesture, every word, every action reverberates, adds an angel that exists in the world. So we're constantly giving birth to angels. It's as though in this room right now, I mean, they're not physical, but we're all constantly giving, like when you're thinking, oh, Kurzweil, he's full of baloney when he's saying this. Well, you just created an angel of a certain sort. It might have been a great angel, or it might have been a really stupid angel. But in any case, you're creating an angel. So what does this mean? Who cares? Who cares? We can imagine, all right, we're creating angels. It sounds like a nice thing, but what does it mean? Rabbi suggests that we are a body and a soul. Our body is temporary, our soul is eternal. So when a person dies, when a person drops their body, when the angel of death comes and separates the body from the soul, and the body goes into the ground, the soul, the non-material aspect of us, that spiritual aspect of us, that eternal soul, has with it, as the rabbi says, parasitically connected to it, all of the angels that we have given birth to through our lives. So if we're giving birth to negative angels constantly, when all we're left with is our spiritual self and what our spiritual self has and body has produced, if it's a lot of negative angels, that's what you're left with. If you produced lots and lots of positive angels throughout your life, added the right dose of this or the right proper dose of that, those positive angels remain with you after death, and your soul it inherits all of the things that it itself created. So Rabbi Steinsaltz goes on and says elsewhere that Tiferet is the sphere of harmonious blending. In many senses, the rabbi says, it is the locus of all the sphirot. So I said it before, but the rabbi is saying it again, that that you could say that sphera of Tiferet is the center of the whole thing. And the rabbi goes on and says, as a central component of the spherotic structure, it contains within itself disparate elements, which are, whether those are described in terms of intellect or emotion, but these disparate elements share a common denominator and blend into one perfected being. So even though you have a lot of contradiction, right? You have the ones, the tightness, you have the expansiveness. These seem to be opposites. You have intuition, or you have intellect. These seem to be different modes of consciousness. Somehow or other, within Tiferet, all of them are blended into what Rabbi Steinsaltz says is one perfected being. The quality of the sphere is therefore beauty, which is achieved principally by the correct proportion of color and shape. Again, what proportion? How much of this spice do you put into it? How much of that do you take out of it? He goes on, in terms of emotion, the sphere of Tiferet is compassion. This is a combination of the loving and giving nature of chesed and the limitations of gevura. In other words, the act of giving to those who deserve it. In terms of awareness, it is the trait of truth, the midline, which does not veer to the side but penetrates to the essence. In the human body, the Tiferet is represented by the torso, which is the essence of the human structure, and which contains all the vital inner organs. So there's something profoundly important about what's going on with Tiferet, with the combination of all of the others. But a thing to meditate on is if you combine chesed and gevura, if you combine what the rabbi says is loving and giving, that's chesed, with limitations, that's gevura, somehow the two of them together produces compassion. That's the sphere, the emotion of that central sphere, compassion. We're going to come back to it, but just to put it out right now. Rabbi Steinsaltz quotes someplace else that a Rabbi Esterman explained that the distinction among Jewish souls by correlating them to the six sfirot. Pious men are chesed, strong men are gevura. Torah scholars are tiferet. Prophets are netzach and hod. Tzaddikim are yesod. Every soul source above determines its nature and potential below. In similar fashion to the verse, you did create tzaddikim and you did create wicked men. So we're focusing this evening on Tiferet, and the rabbi is saying that Torah scholars reflect Tiferet. Torah scholars manifest Tiferet. So we said earlier that the rabbi teaches that Tiferet is truth, beauty, harmony, compassion, Torah. So that Tiferet is Torah scholars who are constantly studying, trying to become masters of the 10 sfirot. That each of the stories in the Bible, and on and on and on, are really, on a certain level, representing the sfirot. For example, an extraordinary example, is the example of the Akedah. Abraham takes Isaac up the mountain to slaughter him. Rabbi Steinsaltz, in one of his other books, his book called In the Beginning, he describes how if you read that story in the Torah about Abraham and Isaac, but you think that Abraham represents chesed and Isaac represents gevura, and then you go through the story and you see the relationship between Abraham and Isaac, keeping in mind that Abraham is chesed and Isaac is gevura, the study of Torah, the study of that story in the Torah is a study of how do you function, how do the sfirot function, how do you, getting to know those sfirot so that you can best add what you need to add to create that harmony. I want to skip to one last one over here and we'll go back to the chapter. If you go, beg your pardon. Okay, the rabbi says it's number 15 in the handout, if you have the handout in this room. A passing remark is here in place concerning the use of the plural in the ways of Torah. Isn't it one way and not many? Right? Isn't it the way of Torah, not the ways of Torah? Why do we say the ways of Torah? To be sure, there is a Kabbalistic definition of way as the three sfirot, chesed, gevura, and tiferet. These are the three basic lines of existence. They parallel the three fundamentals we have learned from the sages: Torah, divine worship, and kindness. With kindness corresponding to chesed, divine worship to gevura, and Torah to tiferet. These can be considered the three ways of the Torah, each of them an expression of a different mode and attribute. In addition to all these, however, is the more encompassing view that every mitzvah is in itself a separate path or way for the experience of delight in being. This is the meaning of the use of the plural in the biblical statement, her ways are ways of pleasantness. And thus every mitzvah is a pathway for holiness and divine delight, to go from level to level of being. So we often can ask ourselves, who am I? Am I more of a chesed person? Am I more of a gevura person? Am I more of a tiferet person? Obviously, each of us are all of those, but what are the combinations? And again, tiferet is Torah. So with that in mind, let's go back to the chapter and see what the rabbi does with this. We're gonna look on page 64. The last paragraph on the bottom, the rabbi writes, one of the definitions of the name man or Adam is likeness to the Supreme. For like God, man creates the worlds in the image of himself. His physical form, so a person's physical form, the assemblage of its several parts, constitutes a system that is a sort of model of the inner network of all the worlds. The structure of man is a paradigm of the structure of the worlds. It is a key to the order of the mitzvot. And it is also the configuration that symbolizes the system of relationships among the worlds. All the organs of man correspond to higher essences in other worlds. The general structure of the human body is homologous with the order of the 10 Sefirot, every part of the body of man being congruous with a particular Sefirah. So I think that the reason why this chapter was so difficult for me at the beginning of my encounter with it is because it was such a foreign idea to me. The idea being that everything in the world is a manifestation of God. Right? God created everything. We put things together, we combine things and so forth, but everything is an abstraction that is made concrete. Everything in the world is some abstraction that when you bring it down levels into the physical world, it becomes concrete. So if that isn't difficult enough to grasp and to picture, the rabbi goes one more step and says, but man is the exception. We are not just the physical form of something more abstract that has been brought down levels to a physical level. The human is not just, rather the human being in all of its parts, one head, 2 ears, 2 arms, a torso, legs, etc., is the divine manifestation, the most accurate divine manifestation in the world. It's as if by looking at a person, or let me say it a different way, the rabbi says by looking at your own body, by looking in your own body and at your own body, you can learn the entire Torah. The entire Torah exists in the relationships between and among the parts of the body. So that, for example, Rabbi Sandal says, a profound idea in the universe, in the world, is the idea of right and left. The right and left, which we know from our hands, from our arms. Some of us are righty, some of us are left. There's a difference between right and left. The fact that there's a difference between right and left is not just a nice biological observation, the rabbi says, but rather it's a glimpse into a profound idea about creation itself. And that every detail of the body is a manifestation of God in some way. So let's now watch how he takes this even more extreme. The rabbi says, thus when the prophets speak of the hand or the eyes of the Lord, it's understood they're not speaking of essences in any way physically similar to a human hand or eye. We know that God doesn't, we say an outstretched arm. We know that God doesn't have an arm, eyes. At the same time, the rabbi says there's some essential connection to the human body. The relation between the right hand and left, for instance, is a matter of a profound principle, which is derived from the difference between the sphere of Chesed and Gevurah. And so too with all the parts of the human body in their general configuration and down to the smallest detail. So both the smallest details of our body, as well as the general configuration of being organic. There's a head, there's an arm. If somebody said to me, look, I have to either cut your head off or your hand off, which is it going to be? don't have to think too long about that. I can do without the hand, perhaps, but I can't do without the head. So it's organic. It doesn't mean that each part is the same. It means that each part of our body comes together to form one whole. And then it's our job, as the only element in the universe that has free will, it's our job to make decisions constantly. Is this a moment of chesed? Is this a moment of gevura? Is this a moment of intuition? Is this a moment of more research? Is this a moment of bearing down? Is this a matter of more discipline? What elements do I have to bring to the situation in order to do what? In order to create some kind of beauty, some kind of harmony, adding the right dose of something to balance out the picture. To balance out the picture. I remember we were talking not long ago. Rabbi Steinsaltz made a suggestion to somebody that they have to be a little more crazy. This was a prescription for the person, to be a little more crazy. Now, not everybody needs that prescription. Some people need to be perhaps a little less crazy, but some people need to be a little bit more crazy sometimes, the rabbi was suggesting. It's never any one thing. It's each of us individually have to look at the whole universe and decide what is the next spice that I'm going to add, or what is the next spice that I'm going to I'm going to take back. So the rabbi says, man, therefore, may therefore be viewed as a symbol or model of the divine essence. His entire outer and inner structure manifesting relationships and different aspects existing in that supreme essence. So what an idea. A man should be viewed as a symbol or model of the divine essence. So this is a clue as to why the chapter begins talking about why the tradition has some hesitation about creating pictures, creating statues of a person, because when you create a statue of a person, in a sense, you're creating, what is he saying, a symbol or model of the divine essence. And as we know, the sages are telling us over and over again, if you have a physical notion of God, you're wrong. You have to get that out. We think and we ponder about the nature of my relationship with Hashem, but if I think that I understand it, well, I have to throw that out because there's no way for me to understand it. Nonetheless, a human being, in all of its detail, is a model of the divine essence. His entire outer and inner structure manifesting relationships and different aspects existing in that supreme essence. The secret of the positive mitzvot, the commandments to perform certain actions, lies in a manner of speaking, in the activization of the limbs of the body, in certain movements and certain ways of doing things which are congruous with higher realities and higher relationships in other worlds. In fact, and here's the gigantic, terrifying idea, every movement, every gesture, every habitual pattern, every isolated act that man does with his body has an effect in whole systems of essences in other dimensions with and against one another. So I go through my day thinking that I know what I'm doing. I'm eating breakfast, I'm doing this, I'm taking a walk, I'm whatever, and I think that this is what I'm doing. Rabbi suggesting that, yes, this is what you're doing, but the Torah teaches us that you're also having an impact on whole systems that you may not even be aware of. And part of the study of Torah is to become more and more aware of those non-physical essences that also are part of who we are. Now, in a comforting way, the rabbi goes on to say, clearly an ordinary person does not know anything of this. So, I'm an ordinary person because I don't think about these things every moment of my existence. That anything and everything that that gesture, that thought, boy, am I in trouble. But the rabbi says at best, the person is conscious only to a small degree of things he does and of their higher significance. Even among those few who are able to unravel the riddle and know the meaning of these secrets, only select individuals reach that state of being where knowledge is automatically lived out and manifested. It's a state where every act of a mitzvah or an impulsive movement or a dance expresses knowingly and unknowingly the higher relationships following on analogous parts of the body, and they're separate as well as their total effect. What does this mean? The rabbi explains in the next paragraph. He says, now you can understand why fashioning and exhibiting the image of man was prohibited, since man was, according to one of the sages, an effigy of the king. Anyone who tried to make something in his image was creating a statue or an idol. Man was supposed to know that his body was not only the temple and the abode of the soul, but in itself an expression of the supreme essence. So each of us are individually an expression, the highest expression of a divine manifestation, and therefore, the rabbi says, that person has to maintain a special relationship to the body, because we need to acknowledge that every gesture, every movement, every action involves manifestations of a higher order. Let's say that I say something and it's a nasty insult to somebody who doesn't deserve it. So I'm creating an angel of some sort, and that angel takes its place in the universe. If I'm constantly creating angels with every gesture, every thought, then one can say that there's more spiritual than non-spiritual, than physical. I feel like I'm mostly physical, right? I feel like I'm physical. I have a physical body. There are people who think that you're a body, you're born, you live, you die. Others say, no, I'm not just a body with physical. I'm spiritual. There's a spiritual aspect to me. I'm not just my physical aspects. That's my soul. I don't just have a body. My body has a soul. Well, as we've said many times, our tradition teaches that both of those notions are incorrect. We're not just a body, and we're not a body that has a soul. We're a soul that has a body. So that the soul is the permanent part of us. The body is the temporary part of us. Soul existed before this body. The soul picks up this body. It uses this body. It drops this body. It goes on. The soul is the eternal part of it. And all of those spiritual creations, those positive and negative angels that we are constantly creating, are populating the universe. Not the physical universe, but the spiritual universe. So the rabbi is suggesting that we need to understand the implication of everything that we do, our gestures, our thoughts, our imagination, our actions, everything. It's not just what we do physically that makes a difference. So on page 66, the rabbi says on the top paragraph, that since, like his soul, the body of man is oriented to higher essences, the idiom of the Kabbalah often makes use of organs of the body to depict conditions and higher relations in other worlds. In other words, he goes on and says, in practical Kabbalistic works, there are to be found indications of various, sometimes impossible movements of the limbs and parts of the body, which serve to shed light on the complex occult ways of the chariot, on different planes and in different worlds. The rabbi is suggesting here is that there are Kabbalistic works that describe things using the human body as the vocabulary, and sometimes the descriptions are of the human body doing things that we know that human bodies can't do, because they're not talking about the human body. They're only using the human body as as symbolizing one or more of these sefirot. So when you have an arm that is doing something that we know that an arm can't do, if we know that the right is chesed, and that right arm is then being described as doing something that we know physically can't be done, we're not to get bogged down by that, oh, you can't do that physically. Rather, understanding what the symbolism is and that it's trying to express abstract ideas. So the rabbi goes on and says, as has been said, precisely because there is such a voluminous and frequent use of symbolic structures and models, most of them connected with external forms, it's necessary to be extremely cautious about any attempt to give a concrete physical interpretation to higher essences. So we have in our literature, in the Talmud, in the Torah itself, it's all describing physical things. You go, I often think somebody goes to one of these New Age bookstores. There are so many New Age bookstores in the United States. There's a section on Zen Buddhism and Hinduism and all kinds of things, and beautiful books on all lovely topics, friendship and world peace and equanimity, lovely poetic books. And the seeker who goes to a bookstore like this and sees these beautiful, uplifting, poetic books about such sublime ideas, you get inspired by it. And then that same moment, and you open up Baba Metzia, which is not volume 1, but there's no volume 1 in the Talmud, but it's often the volume that students start with, Yeshiva, Baba Metzia. So what does it say at the beginning of Baba Metzia? If Reuven is holding a talus and Shimon is holding a talus, and Shimon says it's his and Reuven says it's his, whose talus is it? All those other books in the bookstore about such lovely ideas, love and marriage, and then I get to the Talmud and it's talking about it. This has holding a shmata, and this one's holding a shmata. Whose shmata is it? And I'm looking for spirituality, I'm looking for meaning, and I'm looking for God. And they're talking about if Reuven's holding a cloth and Shimon's holding a cloth. Where's the spirituality here? Where are the ideas here? Where's the inspiration here? So the rabbi is pointing out in this chapter that because our literature, the Jewish literature is so filled with physical descriptions, this is why we shy away from any kind of physical representation of the divine. It's such a temptation to do. I mean, after all, we just said before that each of us, in our parts as a body, we're like the effigy of the king. We're a model of the divine to a certain point. But we have to make sure that we don't get confused and think that the physical thing that we're talking about is just physical. And there's such a temptation to do that, to put the divine in physical. So we have this paradox. We have, on the one hand, we have this tremendous amount of descriptions of things, of physical things that relate to God, to the divine. On the other hand, we are warned constantly that there's no physical descriptions that you can possibly bring to this. And it's somehow in between that, dealing with that contradiction, that paradox, that is the way of Judaism. So if we just skip now for a moment, just to the last 2 paragraphs of the chapter, because I think this is the connection of Tiferet to beauty and to the theme of our global day this year. Well, let's go 1 paragraph back on 66 to the bottom paragraph. So the rabbi is saying that instead of, I was in the Ukraine a couple of weeks ago, and I went into a Greek Orthodox church, and I was talking to the minister who was in the church about icons, because the church is filled with icons. And I was talking to him about how I never understood that icons are really not just pretty pictures of biblical events in that religious tradition, but that these pictures have tremendous content to them. symbolic content, similar to like a tarot card, where every detail has content. But in Jewish tradition, we have shied away from pictures. We've shied away from illustrations that have anything to do with the divine. Instead, and this is how they're out, instead of that iconographic imagery, the tradition developed a whole order of mitzvot, which may be seen as a stylization of a system of pictures and symbols using the body and mind of man. Right? Instead of painting and sculpting and creating icons that depict ideas, instead our tradition has developed a choreography of a dance. It's not making of pictures and making of statues. It's rather a choreography of a dance. So he says, in a certain sense, the mitzvot, in all their minutiae, constitute an endless moving series of images depicting a vision of supreme revelation. So it isn't a fixed image. It isn't a fixed statue, a picture. It's a constantly moving, constantly flowing system where endless moving series of images. These images are expressed in objective actions, but are not to be identified with them. And if the action is a correct action, in terms of the original revelation, then it will have significance within other systems of reality. So you're presented with a situation. What do I do? Is this a moment of chesed? Is this a moment of gevura? Well, if I understand the situation that I'm confronting, if I have a grasp of what is going on in this room or in this world or in this situation, if I have a grasp of that, then I'm better able to know what the situation calls for. Rabbi Steinsaltz in Third Petalled Rose says that consciousness, that raising our level of consciousness is the purpose of life, to raise your level of consciousness, so that you're not just seeing superficially, that you see deep into the situation. You're seeing the essences, not just the actors who are playing it. That consciousness is the way, as the rabbi says, consciousness is our way to perfection. When we're trying to perfect ourselves, we're trying to be better people. We're trying to fine-tune our behaviors and our thought patterns and so forth. Each of these efforts needs to have information. What's the situation? Does the situation call for strictness, or does the situation? I had a roommate many years ago, and one day went outside, and the car, my roommate's car, had scratches all over it, and 4-letter words all over, scratched into the car. And we called the police and quickly found out that it was the little boy who lived on the right side and on the left side. These two little boys, one day when we weren't home, they had fun scratching this car. These were little boys who, they didn't even know what the 4-letter words meant that they were writing. They went crazy for some reason. But the detectives came, and you can only imagine when the detective comes and he's asking these two little boys what happened and so forth. And the social worker got involved, and the school guidance counselor got involved. And at one point, I went to all of them and I said, please, just forget it. Just forget the whole thing. These are good boys. I know these boys. I play with them all the time. I like performing magic, so I'm always looking for the boys so I can show them a new magic trick. They just went crazy one day. Don't label them. Don't get the guidance counselor involved and get them. Don't let the whole school know these are the boys who did that terrible thing. It was my intuition that those boys didn't deserve that. That even though it might have been a moment for strictness, I had the sense, no, it wasn't. Now, I don't know if I was right or not. Maybe those boys are in federal penitentiary in some place. But no, I had a feeling that wasn't the case. That sometimes you have to, even though it seems like you have to be strict, that you have to see more than just the surface. More than just the surface. You have to see what's going on and what are the implications of it. So just to finish the paragraph at the end of the chapter. Two paragraphs up, because this brings it to beauty. The rabbi says, this grasp of symbols applies not only to the human figure, but to every reality in the world. To those who know this meaning, reality is more clear and comprehensible. Like those of us who work hard at trying not to just be fooled by the surface. Reality could sometimes, you hope, is more clear and comprehensible. Thus, for instance, there's significance to the various colors and their relationships, each one expressing a certain sphera. So each of the spherot has a corresponding color. Fruits and flowers, kinds of living creatures, forms of vegetable life and minerals, all have individual meaning and at the same time make up a great unified system in which the whole of reality acts and is acted upon. This is the vast picture, the great work of plastic art of a moment in time. So before we get to the last paragraph, so just imagine, everyone, each of these spheres has a corresponding color. So in the same way that if you can understand the situation, you understand the inner situation, you're better in a better position to know whether this calls for a little bit of chesed, or this calls for a little bit of gvura, or what exactly the situation calls for. Well, the rabbi is suggesting the same thing goes with colors. The thing that a certain combination of colors is, for lack of a better word, the right combination, a harmonious combination. Somehow it's one could put together a bunch of colors that are not harmonious. But that could be the point of the artist, to somehow put those colors together in a way that's jarring, in the same way that we might do with any of the 10 sefirot. We have to choose every moment. Is this called for a moment where I want to shake people up and make and jar, or is this one where I want to create something that's more tranquil? So the rabbi says, in Jewish thought, the concept of beauty is linked to the central sphere of Tiferet, which in itself is actually an expression of several basic elements of existence, each of them manifesting the same fundamental quality in different ways, such as Torah, truth, Torah, beauty, compassion. The common denominator may be seen as harmony. And since this apprehension of harmony is so many-sided and variegated, it cannot be reduced to only one aesthetic meaning. Since there are so many elements, so many possibilities, you can't say this is beautiful, this is harmonious. It's a constant moving picture. And the rabbi finally says, even in the Hebrew language, there's a constant interchange and substitution between the concepts of good and beautiful, the good being called beautiful and the beautiful good, because both are grasped as a harmony between things. And the last sentence, which I think is a potent sentence, Tiferet is thus the basis of the good, the beautiful, and the true, without ever being manifested or capable of being directly expressed in an image. The grasp of what is Tiferet, you can't illustrate it by an image. The image keeps changing. Life keeps changing. The situation keeps changing. So I'm just saying the same thing over and over again. Let me just, as an aside for a moment, just say that many people have said that Petalled Rose is a very difficult book. What can I say? I want to say that after sitting with this book for 30 years and trying to chip away at it and understand it, at the end of the whole thing, it's a pretty simple book. It's a pretty easy book in the following way. The Baal Tanya, the first Lubavitch Rebbe, he has an epigraph at the beginning of the Tanya, a little phrase, a little quote from Tanakh. And the essence of the phrase is, this is all very close to you. This is not something that's very far. It wants to assure the reader, the students, that there's nothing here that you don't know. This is all very familiar. It's all very familiar. It's not something that is so foreign that you have no way of grasping it. No, it's rather familiar. So when I say that, what is beauty? Well, it depends. That's the Jewish answer. It depends what is beauty. What's the situation, and what do I have to add to it to make it a beautiful situation, to make it a good situation? What do I have to take out of it, perhaps, to make it a good situation? It's never just one. We don't say this is beautiful. This is the definition of it. It's a fluid system where you don't get the answer. Rather, you participate, and we hope that by studying and studying and studying, we gain a little bit of insight into how the world is functioning, and then we ourselves are better able to function as human beings and can contribute to a world and make it more beautiful. We make it more beautiful by making it more harmonious. We make it more harmonious and beautiful by seeking the truth, and we seeking the truth by studying Torah and finding out hopefully what that truth is. So beauty and ugliness is a tough topic when we're trying to define it in one limited way. But when we see that beauty is really the sphere of Tiferet, which is the torso, which is trying to integrate everything in its right and its proper proportion in a harmonious and healthy way, then an insight into what Tiferet and what the Jewish notion of beauty is becomes more clear. So I don't know how much time we have, but I'd like to tie it up now and ask if there are questions. And I just received a question online. Will the rabbi give us any insight into the Tzelem Elohim as it relates to both men and women? Well, I would, I'm smiling because I remember having a couple of conversations with Rabbi Steinsaltz about this. And, but when we talk about male and female, we're not just to put it simply, I think, we're not talking about physically male and female. In other words, everybody has male and female within them. It isn't that we're not talking about the biological male and female. So so it's not as if God is the man image versus God is the woman image. It's the when my daughter, my oldest daughter, when she was a little girl, and she asked me, she said to me, Abba, what's sex? What is sex? I said to her, well, let's look at the Song of Songs in Tanakh first. This is erotic poetry, and I wanted my daughter to understand that the sages teach us that perhaps the best way that we can describe our relationship to God is using erotic images and erotic terms. That these are erotic images and terms are not somehow dirty or not somehow just private. They are the best way in which we can describe our relationship to God. It's not a male or female thing. It has nothing to do with men and women. It's each individual. And I think, let me just say that I think I'm about to say something that the rabbi taught me, which one of the most important things I think I ever learned from him. Your relationship to God is a totally private affair. It's nobody's business. It's nobody else's business. You don't have to justify it to anybody else. It's you as a human form, you as a human being relating to the eternal. I don't think that the Tzelem Elohim is a male-female genitals issue at all. Is that fair? Anybody have any other comments or questions?
Harmony is the center of everything.
Is that right?
Harmony is the center of everything in every situation. Essentially, we try to analyze it as much as we can. And then all the teachings that we learn from Torah and the Talmud, we try to apply them and so we'll come up with an equitable. So I always think equity is a tremendous part of the whole thing. Okay? To come up with that which fits the situation.
Thank you. We talked once before. We're on a street here in New York City, and about 15, 20 blocks from here, there's a restaurant that every once in a while I have had the privilege of taking Rabbi Steinsaltz to the restaurant. And one night I was at this restaurant with the rabbi, and the guy who works in the restaurant, the mashgiach, the one that's kosher supervisor, comes over and recognizes Rabbi Steinsaltz, and he starts to talk, and the man says, maybe you heard of my great-grandfather. He lived in Jerusalem. His name was so-and-so. He was a posek. Rabbi Steinsaltz said, of course, sure, he was a famous guy. The rabbi said to him, did you ever hear the story about your great-grandfather and the egg? And the guy said, I never heard it. And Rabbi said, no, it's a famous story about your great-grandfather and an egg. You know, he was a posek. He decided questions of law. And one evening, there was an 8-year-old girl who apparently had walked through 3 different neighborhoods in Jerusalem with a little dish and a cracked egg in the dish, wanting to ask this posek if the egg was kosher. There must have been some possible little problem there. The rabbi said that the egg was kosher, and the girl left. And the students of the rabbi who was sitting there said, Rabbi, you said that the egg was kosher, but you didn't even look at the egg. How do you say it's kosher? And the rabbi said, well, the tradition says that we're supposed to respond in a lenient way if somebody is in a certain pressure situation. If there's a hardship, you decide leniently. If a mother sends an 8-year-old girl 3 neighborhoods one night through Jerusalem with one egg, just one egg, I didn't have to look at the egg. I knew there was a hardship, and therefore I said it was kosher. To me, it's an example of what you're saying. It isn't just an answer that you can look it up in the book. You have to take, when the plague happened, the Black Plague happened, and the rabbi of the community said everybody has to eat on Yom Kippur. And the story says he even went to the door of every shul in the town and he ate in front of everybody on Yom Kippur because people were so ill and they had to have nourishment. When the whole horrible thing was over, somebody from out of town came in and heard about it and said to the rabbi, Rabbi, I heard what happened. I understand you're lenient when it comes to fasting. And he said, no, I'm strict when it comes to health. Once again, it was a balance. He had to find what was the element to make the situation a more beautiful, more harmonious, a more true kind of a situation.
And Baba is all these situations that they discuss. The arguments will come that which fits the situation.
Yeah, the situation.
And crazy, okay? But
some of them are wild, but it doesn't matter if they're wild. You see, you tell them, and you have to.
They're really always driving the same thing. The equity and the fairness and the harmony.
What a tragedy. I think what a tragedy for people, Jews who are turned off by Judaism because they have walked away thinking that it's a cookbook. that there's do's and don'ts. You do the do's, you don't do the don'ts, and that's it.
Well, in my generation, that's what they forced us to think.
Yeah.
And turned everybody off.
Rabbi Steinsaltz's model, let my people know, is Judea. Don't take somebody else's word for Judaism. Go find out for yourself. And as you're saying, you'll find out that we're talking about real situations and different, and trying to think what element's more important, what's fair, what's not fair.
What you just said, Bob, I'll tell you, okay?
We're finished. So we are finished. There are other questions, and it's very good that there are other questions because we have to go on asking more and more questions. But thank you very much for this opportunity. I always love studying Petalled Rose with other people, and you've given me that opportunity. Thank you very much. Bye.